Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning, my friends. How are you? How's the Tuesday going? A little cooler, a little moister. That's good for all the forest fires that are going on. At least it's not pouring down rain. That's all I could say. And it's not snowing, which is always a plus. I'm just so glad it's not snowing. Anyway, we are ready here. It is Tuesday of this short week. Again, the holiday weekend coming up Thursday and Friday. You'll be listening to alternate programming. I will be holidaying with the family and kids. I mean, it's a staycation, but it'll feel good. We're here. We'll be here today and tomorrow, and then alternate programming on Thursday and Friday, and then we'll be returning on Monday. So be looking forward to that. But just a heads up, I won't be here Thursday, Friday. Tuesday means it is, we got our preset guests. These are the preset guests for every week on Tuesday. In hour one, Brad Keithley comes in to give us the weekly top three, which he calls Truth Tuesdays. He's trying to rebrand. I think it's because I called it the Baton Death March, but I'm not sure. It might be that was what it was, that he decided that Truth Tuesdays was a better name. He consulted a marketing department. And then Chris Story will be joining us in hour two for our weekly uplift. All right, let's get over to the start of Truth Tuesdays here with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets and see what he has to say. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Michael, I'm doing great today. I was going for alliteration, right? You like alliteration, so
I do. I love alliteration. Yeah, and the Baton Death March does not have the same alliteration as Truth Tuesday. You are 100% correct. Although it does feel like it's a pretty tough time sometimes because sometimes the truth hurts. I mean, that's a truism for sure. And sometimes these things that we should be paying attention to, I think people would rather avoid. And I understand that sometimes avoidance is a coping mechanism, but we can't keep doing it indefinitely. So I'm glad to have you on board and glad to have you giving us the rundown this week. We start off with the big news on Friday. The governor kind of quietly issued his vetoes. In fact, he did all the vetoes on Thursday and then didn't announce it until 4 p.m. on Friday, which is a calculated move, obviously. Wanted to miss the news cycle, but he had his budgets and he vetoes and then he signed the budget into law. And so that's where we're going to start on the weekly top three. Give me your take on this.
Well, in the governor's announcement of signing the budget and the vetoes, he referenced a number, and that's sort of like a red flag to me of oh my gosh, there's a number. Let's see if that number is true. The number was in the last sentence of his press release. It says, since FY 2019, budget growth has averaged 1.2% annually. Well, I've been working on the numbers since I saw that on Friday, and I can't find it. I mean, maybe if you throw in all of the federal spending, and maybe if you look at it from, tilt your head to the right and then to the left and then sort of twist it around, you may be able to find that number. But I haven't been able to recalculate that number. Here's what I found though. And I think this sort of encapsulates the Dunleavy administration and sort of shows what's gone on with the Dunleavy administration. And it is what it is. I'm not necessarily saying anybody else could have done better, but this is what's happened. Bill Walker had a total UGF spend in FY19, which is the baseline from which to evaluate the Dunleavy administration. He had a total UGF spend of $4.8 billion. The FY24 budget that we just finished, and the reason I'm going to use the FY24 budget is because it's got all the supplementals, the FY24 supplementals in it. The FY25 budget, which the Dunleavy administration would want to tout, doesn't have any supplementals. And they're coming next year. It's got $170 million in so-called surplus in there already set aside for supplementals. So the FY25 budget really is not comparable to. You can't go back and say, well, we're going to compare this against FY19 because FY25 doesn't have the supplementals in yet. But the FY19 budget, the last Bill Walker budget was $4.8 billion. The FY24 budget, the one we just finished, the one that has all the supplementals in it, is $5.5 billion. That's 5 years. That's the effect of 5 years of the Dunleavy administration. We've gone from $4.8 billion to $5.5 billion. That's about a 15% increase over that period of time, over that 5 years. If you average that out, that's about 3%, not 1.9%. That's about 3% growth. If you do it on a compounded growth basis, that's about 2.75% growth over that period. So when you start claiming, when the Dunleavy administration starts claiming they've kept spending under control, well, it could have been 20% growth, I suppose, but it's been 15% growth. It's been average over the 5 years. It's been average 3% growth. Here's the other numbers that I think are to set alongside that number, I think are important. Looking at the PFD, the statutory PFD over that 5 year period did grow. I mean, you can still calculate the statutory PFD. It's still in the statute. The statutory PFD over that period of time grew from $1.9 billion to $2.25 billion. These are gross numbers. These aren't broken down to per PFD. But 1.9 up to 2.25. That would have been a growth in the PFD over that period of about 18%. And that would have been, a significant growth over that 5 year period. What happened with the continued PFD cuts under the Dunleavy administration, and Dunleavy signed the budgets. What happened with the PFD under the Dunleavy administration is we've gone from 1.02 in the last year of the Walker administration. And remember, we thought at the time that was a fairly deep PFD cut, down to $1.02 billion, roughly $1 billion. The FY24 PFD is $880 million. So while spending has been going up over the 5 year period, the PFD and the statutory PFD would have been going up, or has been going up over that period. The actual PFD over that period, the amount set aside for the PFD, has gone down by roughly 14%, about the same 15%, frankly, that spending has gone up. So during the Dunleavy administration, while spending's gone up over those 5 years, 15%, the PFD has gone down about 15% over that same period of time. So yes, it could have been worse. I mean, you could have had people who didn't veto, frankly, the little bit that Dunleavy vetoed along the way. But it could have been worse. But it's not great from the standpoint of saying I constrain. If Dunleavy's claim is I constrained spending to less than 2%, which is what they're trying to claim in the press release. If Dunleavy's claim is he constrained spending to less than 2%, he didn't. I mean, these are UGF numbers, unrestricted general fund numbers, which is what everybody agrees is sort of the discretionary part, what the legislature and what the governor has control over. Federal funds are just flow through. DGF, designated general funds, are largely flow through. This is what the legislature and the governor have to play with. And that's gone up about 15% over the 5 years, about an average of 3% growth over the years. While the PFD, which Dunleavy came into office claiming he was going to protect, is an absolute amount, has gone from $1 billion under Walker's last year, after Walker cut it, down to $880 million, a decline of 13% over that period of time. So it's not, to claim victory, as I said, that putting a percentage number, a claim percentage number in the press release was sort of like a red flag. Rather than claim victory, I would say that the job that the Dunleavy administration has been on the negative side. Spending growth, I will give him spending growth. That's not that distant. The amount of spending growth is not that distant from inflation. But at the same time, to see the PFD cuts increase over that period, to see the PFD decrease as an absolute dollar figure, both as a percent of the amount of the statutory PFD, the statutory dividend, the actual PFD is decreases a percent of that, but also to decreases an absolute amount over that period of time, I think is a failure on Dunleavy's part. If you look back at the 2018 campaign and what he said about the PFD and what he said about the PFD continually since, I think that's a failure on his part. So
Now,
it's you can't take these budgets at face value. You got to dig into them and understand what's going on with them.
yeah, I mean, I agree with it. And to me, I don't always look necessarily at the percentage as much as I look at the actual raw dollar figure. And when you figure out that, since his finalized fiscal year with supplemental budget in 2020 was nearly $1 billion less only 4 years ago, going on 5 years ago, and you extrapolate that out and you realize, well, if we're going to double it, if we're going to do $1 billion every 5 years, it doesn't take long. I mean, the 10-year projections then are justified in what we've been talking about, and it goes on from there. I mean, it's going to be out of money, right? Because if they're adding $1 billion every 4 or 5 years, that's a significant jump, and we don't have the money to pay for that right now.
Well, it wipes out the PFD for sure, and it flips you back into deficit if you add another $1 billion. The big problem here when you look through the years is FY23. We got a bunch of oil money in, and the legislature sort of went catch up. Well, they not only caught up to where they were, but they sort of went a little bit ahead. We jumped from FY22. The budget was at $4.9 billion. We jumped up to $5.6 billion. We jumped what is that, $6 billion or $7 billion, or $700 million rather in 1 year, and that's really where the Dunleavy administration lost control. They will claim that the PFD also went up that year, and so Alaskans got some benefit of that, but not by the same percentage. The PFD didn't go up by the same percentage as spending went up, and we still had PFD cuts. We still had about on an absolute basis, we still had about $500 million in PFD cuts in FY23.
In an attempt to be fair to the governor, because he's obviously not doing all this alone, he did run on protecting and having a fully funded PFD. So what should he have done, Brad? Because again, he can't add money to the budget. He can only veto and subtract, and then that's back in the hands of the legislature. And the legislature has been hell-bent on election of basically taking and tapping the PFD and using it as a money source. That's why we haven't had it. So in fairness to Dunleavy, what should he have done differently, in your opinion, to protect the PFD, which, again, was a huge campaign issue for him in both elections?
Well, I think the Fiscal Policy Working Group has outlined it, Michael. I mean, we talk about that. We talk about that repeatedly on the show, about the Fiscal Policy Working Group had outlined a little bit of everything, a little bit of spending cuts, a little bit more from oil, which I think is, just as we've talked on the show, which I think is justified, a little bit from top 20% non-residents in terms of a broad-based tax, as opposed to the targeted tax that the PFD cuts are, a little bit of spending cuts and capped by a spending cap, and a little bit of PFD cuts. I mean, part of the Fiscal Policy Working Group was to go from the current statute down to POMV 50/50, which is a material cut. in itself of the PFD. So a little bit of everything. The problem, and the governor himself last session, not this immediate last session, but the session before, when he came out and he talked about, the brief moment in time he talked about a sales tax. He said the last thing you want to do is to shove the responsibility for balancing the budget or for fixing the fiscal the state's fiscal situation on one group. The last thing you want to do is focus it on one group. You want it to be broad based, a little bit on everybody as opposed to a lot on one group. But that's exactly what's happened here. I mean, but through PFD cuts, it focuses the impact on middle and lower income Alaska families. You don't get any contribution from non-residents. You don't get any contribution from oil. You don't get any contribution from the top 20%. And I think looking back and looking at the issue as the fiscal policy working group did at the time, I think the little bit from everything. I think if the governor had endorsed that, we would be miles ahead at this point.
Brad Keithley, Alaska's 4 sustainable budgets, the weekly top 3, and Truth Tuesdays continues. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the break with Brad Keithley. Donna says, it's more telling to use the fiscal year 20 as a starting point. Dunleavy's first budget compared to his latest UGF was $4.3 billion in fiscal year 20. And compared to the fiscal year 25, which is $6.3 billion. So almost a $2.2 billion difference in the fiscal years from his first to his next.
Yeah, that 6.3 counts the PFD. You're including the PFD as part of UGF right. When you do that, and I think it's much better to strip out the PFD and look at that separately and look at government spending on programs and on capital budget separately. And those were the numbers I was using. But yeah, I mean, you can pick any point. FY20 was in fact smaller, was a lower spend than Walker. Even with all the pushback he got on the vetoes, he managed to get FY20 a little bit lower. And he managed to get FY21 a little bit lower than that. And then sort of the wheels came off the bus. Big jump to FY22, even bigger jump to FY23, and FY24 is about the same as FY23. So there was a period. I mean, you can, if you want to tighten up the time frame and make a worse comparison, there is a period of time when it looked like Dunleavy was keeping the wheels on the bus, and then the wheels on the bus came off, and it was that's at the same time as spending is going up, the PFD is starting to come down. The gross amount of the PFD is starting to come down.
Well, we're going to continue on with this, but Brad, you look very tropical, and you're traveling. Obviously, your internet is kind of washing in and out. Your audio is great, but your video is like somebody said, did I take Advil or something stronger this morning? Because Brad looks really blurry. But what's going on? What do you do? No, it's not you. It's the internet. It is what it is. But what are you up to between the shirt and the sunshine coming in or the light coming in? It looks like you're out having a good time somewhere.
Well, I'm in Cape Breton. This is a music weekend or a music festival week. It's called Kitchen Fest with a lot of music around the island. So I came out to Cape Breton to see friends that I've developed over the years here and also to enjoy the music.
Cape Breton, of course, is Brad's version of Homer for me, right? So it's like it's your sacred spot where you go out there and you're like, yep, this is where I get a chance to do it. So I'm glad you're out there enjoying yourself. Any thoughts on any of the vetoes here? We got about 2 minutes. Any of the vetoes that stood out for you on this? I thought they were pretty innocuous overall, but anything that really stood out to you, Brad, on the veto list?
No, it was sort of, there wasn't one veto that really looked like, it made progress. It was sort of, picking here and there. And I'm sure there's a rhyme and reason to it. And I'm sure it has to do something with the legislators and the districts where where the vetoes occurred. But it just sort of looked, very small in terms of the overall budget. What the vetoes were about, $200 million, or plus or minus maybe $300 million if you want to be generous. The overall budget is $5.3 billion before supplementals. And there's another $170 million in surplus, extra take from the PFD that the budget does. And so it's just really, they're minor vetoes, and they may be irritating to whoever got vetoed, but in the big scheme of things, they're just not that big.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was again, and I thought it was a little weird that the way they did it, where they did it on the Thursday and then didn't announce it like there would have been some great hullabaloo. But I mean, Josephson was stomping his feet and standing. He seems to be the poster boy for the stalking horse for all the shouting and everything else on everything. But really, there was not a lot in this that was, shocking, I guess is what I was saying. Not a huge amount of controversial cuts in this. So. But I mean, I'm happy to see it, and I guess we'll see where it leads to. All right, we're coming up to number 2 of the weekly top 3, and we're going to continue, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Permanent Fund Corporation and the board and some of the shenanigans, and dare I say scandals? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this lays out. Please like and share, like and follow, do all the things. Let's get going. Here we go.
Public enema number 1. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number 1, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
Yes, I am. Welcome back to the program. It is the Michael Duke Show. We're broadcasting live on this beautiful Truth Tuesday. Brad Keithley and the weekly top 3 continues. We're on to number 2. Where Brad says the Permanent Fund Corporation is not to be trusted. I just said it coming into the break. I mean, dare we say scandal? Is it scandalous, the behavior, or is it just inappropriate? I mean, what's your take here, Brad? There's a lot of things going on, and some people think it's not a big deal. Some people involved think it's not a big deal, but other people's do. Give me your rundown here.
Well, certainly the Permanent Fund Board executive director, Devin Mitchell, is trying to minimize what's going on. He did that at last week's hearing. LB&A, Legislative Budget and Audit, held a hearing last week focused on the permanent fund. And Devin tried to paint a great picture that everything's good. We're rocking along and we're achieving good things. But it was in the context of legislators all sort of pushing back and saying, no, you're not. And Devin just kept trying to minimize the various things going on. There were a couple of stories out of that if people didn't read them, they're worth checking. One, James Brooks had an article that said that was headlined, after email leak, some Alaska legislators say they're skeptical of permanent fund direction. And then there was another one that was the Beacon, the same story that James wrote appears in a number of different places. But here's my issue with what's going on with the permanent fund. Also, last week, there were a couple of stories that Sean McGuire did one in the ADN that said permanent fund's spendable account faces first potential shortfall starting in July. And the same story by a different author, or the same general gist of a story by a different author over in Alaska Public Media, says why permanent fund managers are again sounding the alarm about a key account running low. And this is the storyline that they've been trying to build, that through the permanent fund dividend and through inflation proofing and through the draw for government, we're draining down the earnings reserve, and we're in danger of running out of money in the earnings reserve, such that we wouldn't have enough to write the checks for the POMV draw, write the checks for government, or write the checks for dividend. And the next step beyond that is we're draining down the earnings reserve, and so we ought to merge the earnings reserve with the permanent fund corpus and just start taking the POMV draw down from that. That's the entire intent behind the the Permanent Fund Corporation strategy. They released a paper, which is one of their major policy papers, called Trustees Paper Number 10, that focuses on this merger of the earnings reserve and the POMV. And they're using this this tool of saying we're draining the earnings reserve, there isn't going to be any money in the earnings reserve, as a manipulative tool to try to manipulate everybody into supporting the merger of the two accounts. Well,
wait, they're creating a crisis? I mean, you're saying the crisis of their own making for their own ends? Say it ain't so.
And it's just it's a horrible twist that they're trying to do. I mean, the reason that the earnings reserve is running down is because over the last 5 years or so, the legislature, with the governor's signature, the legislature has taken $8 billion out of the earnings reserve that it wasn't required to do, wasn't part of inflation proofing at the time, wasn't necessary for inflation proofing at the time, wasn't wasn't important for any other reason, took $8 billion out of the earnings reserve and shoved it over into the permanent fund corpus. And so if you take $8 billion out of something, it's going to have less. And
Right.
and if the earnings reserve account, goes up and down over time, if you take $8 billion out, you've taken, a lot of the reserve that was in the earnings reserve out and put it someplace else. So at the time that they took that $8 billion out, the first tranche, at least the first $4 billion, was justified as prepayment of inflation proofing. We've got inflation proofing coming up. We know that. We're going to prepay it. We're going to move this money over to the corpus, over to the principal, and we're going to prepay inflation proofing. That means if you prepay something, that means you don't have to pay it again when it comes due. And so they left that prepayment in there for a couple of years, and then they started paying it again. And now they seem to have forgotten the footnote that said it was a prepayment has disappeared from the Permanent Fund Corporation's monthly records, and so they've moved the $8 billion over there. They forgot it was a prepayment, and they started making the prepayments again. So now you're draining the fund a second time, right? You've drained the $8 billion out as a prepayment. Now you're not recognizing the prepayment, and now you're starting to take $1 billion plus a year out again to move it over to the earnings reserve. You're paying the bill twice, or move it over to the permanent fund corpus. So it's manipulation. What they're doing is blatantly manipulating the earnings reserve to make it look worse, to add a storyline to why they need to combine these two things together. Combining the two things together is bad, because if the permanent fund doesn't earn the 5%, and we talked about on last week's show and the show before that, I think, that the permanent fund's not earning the CPI plus 5, inflation plus 5%. If it doesn't earn that, it's not filling the earnings reserve at a rate that can keep up with the draw. And it hasn't done that for several years now, on a rolling basis for several years. Like 4 out of the last 5 years, it hasn't earned CPI plus 5. So what they're trying to say is, look, we need to combine the two. We're not refilling it at 5% at CPI plus 5, but we want to draw at CPI plus 5, essentially draw at CPI plus 5. And what that's going to enable you to do is start eating away at the corpus. This is all set up to start eating away at the corpus. And so the manipulation that the Permanent Fund Corporation is engaged in, it really makes me, aside from all of these shenanigans that the board's up to, in terms of the things they're doing, the Anchorage office, investing in Alaska businesses that go bust, and all the stuff that Ellie Rubenstein's doing. Aside from all that, they're engaged in this manipulation on the earnings reserve account. And I just don't, at this point, I don't think I can trust. I don't think anybody should trust what the Permanent Fund Corporation is saying about their financial situation, because they're just manipulating it in a way to try to get to the end result of being able to take from the corpus.
You know me, Brad. I hate to say I told you so, but I've been saying this for 20 years, that the whole intent is to get access to the corpus of the fund. That's the whole point, because it's just too big and juicy a pot of money not to be able to do it. And we've seen this collusion between the Permanent Fund Board and people like Bert Stedman, who've orchestrated it on the legislative side to push all this money out of the earnings reserve to create what is an artificial crisis. I mean, if that $8 billion was still in there, then this wouldn't be, they wouldn't have the ammunition to make these stories, to write these stories to say, oh, it's running out of money now. And again, to conveniently forget that it was supposed to be, and remind me, the POMV, part of that deal was that inflation proofing was baked in, right? It wasn't, further inflation proofing was not required. According to SB 26, that was one of the shiny silver linings of it. And yet they're acting like they've still got to do it as if it's the statutory formula.
Well, they still do have to do it. They have to move it from the earnings reserve. The money's in the earnings reserve. What the earnings reserve should be doing is getting CPI plus 5, CPI being the inflation portion, and they still need to move the inflation portion out of the earnings reserve over to the permanent fund. But they did that with the prepayment, Michael. I mean, here's the deal: the earnings reserve shouldn't be being drained the way it is, because the corpus already has $8 billion of prepaid inflation proofing that's been moved over to it. There's still $5 billion. They did it for a couple of years. They did the prepayment for a couple of years, but there's still $5 billion of excess prepayment sitting over in the corpus. So we could go 5 years at current rates of inflation. We could go 5 years without taking any money out of the earnings reserve and putting it into the corpus. That's how much prepayment we already have in there. When they say there's a crisis, what they're saying is we can't do the POMV draw plus inflation proofing because that's just too much. That's more than what's the earnings reserve is receiving from the corporation, or how much reserve it has in there. But if they turned off inflation proofing, which is what they said they were going to do when they did the prepayment, if they turned off inflation proofing, not only would the earnings reserve be okay, but it would start building back up over a period of time.
Right.
And so we've got manipulation on top of manipulation that's going on here to try to justify trustees paper 10, try to justify setting up a system where people can go in and start draining the corpus.
And of course, your solution to this was a complete rejiggering of the Permanent Fund Board to actually put professionals in there instead of having it be a political board, essentially.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, you look at Texas, you look at other sovereign wealth funds around the nation. Texas has 2 of them. They have 2 school-related permanent funds, and they have a statutory requirement that people on the board have substantial background and expertise in investment in the industry that the Permanent Fund Board should be engaged in. Investments. That's all they should be doing. They shouldn't be trying to jumpstart the Alaska economy by investing a portion of their money in that. All they should be focused on, green eye shades, blinders, just on investment. And other boards that are like that have the requirement that those who serve on those boards have statutory terms, substantial background, and experience in that area. We don't have that.
Yeah, the first highest purpose should be to maximize the return of the fund, period. Full stop. That should be that
should be the only purpose. That shouldn't be just the first purpose. That should be the only purpose of the fund.
Brad, we're coming up on number 3. Give us a quick tease and we'll jump to the break here.
Number 3 is Hillcorp. We're going to talk more about the Hillcorp loophole and how that sort of fungus is now spreading a little bit beyond where it's been. Not just a little bit; it's spreading beyond where it's been, and the concerns that raises.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Hillcorp is the number 3 talking point for the weekly top 3 today for this Truth Tuesday. We'll continue here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with Brad Keithley right after this.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Dukes Show.
Okay, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, continues with us here. I saw that the governor did not veto the $1 billion transfer that was linked in on the thing, and so he's helping to perpetuate this man-made crisis here in this situation. I don't know if that was intentional or an oversight or what, but it starts to raise questions when they're functionally creating a crisis to then be able to exploit it down the road.
Yeah, they're not countering the negative. I mean, they're the negative story that the Permanent Fund Corporation is putting out there about, the earnings reserve being drained. The administration's not doing anything to explain that story, to put the context around it, to explain that the earnings reserve is not in dire shape, that there is this prepayment sitting over in the principal, that we don't have to make the prepayment or the inflation proofing out of the earnings reserve. The administration is not doing anything to counter that story, and I don't know if it's because they don't want to go up against Burt. I don't know if it's because they don't want to go up there against their permanent fund board that the governor's appointed, and start pointing out problems that his own board has created. But for whatever reason, they're not countering that narrative. And so we're setting up a situation. Here's how that situation plays out, Michael. Let's say we finally drain the PFDs, right? And we get down to the point where now we're going to have taxes. Right now, the top 20% is going to have to pay taxes, and now the oil companies are going to have to pay. Are going to have to up their game to what the revenue maximizing level is, to use a term economists use. And they're going to have to start contributing. What they're setting up is a situation where they can say, no, we don't, because look at this. We've merged the permanent fund principal and the permanent fund earnings reserve together. We can continue taking 5% of that, or maybe 5.25% of that, or maybe we can cut back on inflation proofing that we contribute to that, in a way that they then start using that as a way to avoid taxes or alternative revenues, and start draining the permanent fund down in the next effort, the next wave. I mean, we went through the wave in the 20 teens of we're going to drain the SBR in order to avoid taxes. Now we're going to we drained the CBR in order to avoid taxes. Now we're draining the permanent fund dividends in order to avoid taxes. And the fourth step is, let's set up this merger between the earnings reserve and the permanent fund corpus, and then we'll just start draining the permanent fund corpus down in order to avoid taxes. And that's for all the world, that's what this is setting up.
I mean, it's a self-licking ice cream cone. I mean, you're eating the seed corn, diminishing returns. I mean, that only goes on so long before you draw down more than it can return. I mean, but at that point, does it just drain the permanent fund down to zero, and we just keep avoiding it until the $70 billion is completely gone? I mean, that's is that the plan?
You can calculate a trajectory. I did that in a column a few months ago. You can calculate a trajectory where that happens. That column was focused on trustees paper 10 and on what a stupid idea that was to merge the two together. And I said one of the potential consequences is you drain the fund on down, and you can do that. And what's going on is this generation of the top 20%, the oil companies, are saying, we don't want to pay taxes. We just don't want to pay taxes. Thank you very much. So drain the SBR down, drain the CBR down, drain the permanent fund dividend down. And when you get to the end of that, then we'll start, using this new trick we developed by merging the ERA and the earnings reserve account and the corpus together. We'll start using that new trick to start draining down the permanent fund. And maybe in 25 years it'll all be drained, but we'll be gone. we'll have cashed out. We'll have sold our companies. We'll have drained all the oil we're going to drain. It'll be somebody else's problem, but we'll be great during the intervening period. That's what's going on.
and nobody is really. I mean, you are the only one that I've seen write about this in any of the major publications anywhere in the state. Everybody else, Sean McGuire, et cetera, is just towing the line about how this is a crisis, not how the crisis happened, not how it came together, not the mechanisms of it, and how we all just need to get on board with this idea of combining the corpus and the ERA. And again, I hate to say I told you so, but this was the plan all along, apparently. And here we are. All right, we are ready to jump back into it. The final of the weekly top three, talking about Hillcorps' influence expands while the states contract. We will continue with this here. Brad Keithley is our guest. Please share the show wherever you are. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Let's get to it. Here we go. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Brad Keithley starts again with us right now. Let's do it.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay, we're continuing now. Brad Keithley, the weekly top three on this Truth Tuesday. We've got number 3, which is all about Hillcorp as they expand their influence while the state's horsepower in this situation contracts. Brad, tell us your thoughts on this.
All right, let's go back to first principles on the Hillcorp loophole and what the problem is. There are basically 5 pieces to the Alaska oil tax system. One is production taxes. A second is royalties. A third is property taxes. But the third largest and a major piece of it, significant piece of it, is the corporate tax. And the corporate tax is a tax specially designed for petroleum companies, a tax that taxes the corporation's profits. The reason you have these different ways to get at a corporation's at oil revenues is because some years, some of those tax approaches are down. If production's down, for example, royalty be down. Even if prices is up, prices are up. Royalty be down because of production declines. And so you have these different pieces. The corporate tax, the petroleum corporate tax, is an important, significant piece of the overall picture. Hillcorp isn't subject to it. It's not that they don't pay all of it. It's not that they get away with just paying a portion of it. They don't pay any of the corporate income tax because of the way in which their corporation is structured. At the time the petroleum corporate tax was put together, all the major corporations in the state were what's called C corps, C corporations. That's after an Internal Revenue Code numbering system. They were C corps, and so the tax was designed to apply to C corps. After that, subsequent to that, elsewhere in the United States, there grew up a number of what's called S corps that are organized differently.
Right.
And the S corps just were different. Didn't matter to Alaska because we didn't have S corps. We had C corps, and so our corporate tax system worked just fine. But when Hillcorp bought out BP, really when they bought out Chevron and Marathon down in the Cook Inlet, they substituted. They came in with an S corp as opposed to a C corp, and because the tax system was focused on C corps, Hillcorp wasn't subject to it. Minor deal. As long as they were down in the Cook Inlet. But when they bought BP, they supplanted a corporate tax paying entity. BP was a C corp. They supplanted a corporate tax entity with their S corp, and all of a sudden, the Hillcorp exclusion, the Hillcorp loophole from the corporate tax system grew huge as a result of them replacing BP, where BP had been paying about $100 million a year in corporate income taxes. All of a sudden, we were getting zero from that segment of the industry because Hillcorp was excluded as an S corp. And so that's been a problem all along. That's been a growing problem as their corporate income grows. It's been a growing problem all along. Now, We're beginning to see a new consequence of this. The headlines this past week has been Hillcorp says it plans to buy Eni's oil fields on the Alaska North Slope. There's a couple of oil fields that are owned by an Italian oil company, Eni, referred to as Eni. And there's a couple of fields on the North Slope that they own, and Hillcorp is proposing to buy those fields. Eni's been an S Corp paying taxpayer, and now all of a sudden this fungus of Hillcorp not paying corporate taxes. First, it applies in the Cook Inlet, not a big deal. Fungus, then they acquire BP. Fungus starts growing, much bigger, and now they're going to acquire Eni's fields, and they're going to supplant another corporate taxpayer with Hillcorp. The consequence of that is the portion of revenues, the amount of revenues that the state's getting from the corporate income tax, the petroleum corporate income tax, is going down. But spending's going up. So we know what happens, right? We know who's really paying for this. Additional PFD cuts are being used to stem that gap, to plug that hole that's being created by the Hillcorp loophole. Big enough with the Cook Inlet stuff and with BP. Now by acquiring Eni, it's going to grow even bigger. There's one other consequence of this that I sort of stumbled onto as I was thinking about it. We've given Hillcorp a competitive advantage. Let's say there were two companies, and there may have been two companies bidding on the Eni properties, right? Company A, which is a C Corp, let's say Conoco wanted to bid on it. Company A, which is a C Corp, and Company B, Hillcorp, which is an S Corp and not subject to the corporate income tax. Hillcorp can bid more for Eni, for the Eni properties, or for any properties on the North Slope, than a C Corp, because it knows it's going to get the tax advantage from acquiring that property. It's not going to have to pay as much costs in terms of corporate taxes attributable to that property as another company, as a competitor might. So not only are we creating a hole in the budget through this Hillcorp loophole, a hole in the budget that's having to be filled with additional PFD cuts. Not only are we doing that, we're giving Hillcorp an advantage, a competitive advantage in acquiring new properties. Right. So this fungus is not only growing, the state is allowing, or is feeding the fungus and allowing it to grow even larger. I mean, Eni's sitting there, Eni's going, I'm getting so much out of this property, I've got to pay corporate income taxes. That gives me a certain amount of return. Hillcorp's going, well, I'm going to have costs with this property, but I'm not going to have corporate income taxes. So I'm going to be better off. I tell you what, Eni, I'll throw in a little bit in the purchase price for you to leave and for me to get the advantage of that. We're really setting up a situation in which Hillcorp this fungus can sort of grow and metastasize as it acquires additional properties.
Well, and in fairness, I mean, look, the difference between for a C Corp and an S Corp for most people is that the S Corp is more of a private corporation, where the C Corp is a publicly traded corporation. So they have different rules because they have to answer to different outside people. And the bottom line was there's just no tax law or statute for the S Corp because they didn't foresee it. So when you say it's a loophole, you're just saying they're missing money that's on the table. Is that that's what you're saying here? Is that because it's not like they're avoiding taxes. They're a private corporation that has private shareholders. It's not a publicly traded company. So that was the appropriate structure for them, but they're taking advantage of it, is what you're saying.
Well, Michael, I say it is. I say it is. We're leaving money on the table. I mean, the petroleum corporate tax is a part of the overall petroleum tax, and it was designed to raise a certain amount. The petroleum corporate tax is designed to raise a certain amount in a certain way, and the contemplation at the time the state developed the petroleum corporate tax was that everybody was a C Corp, and we were going to get that share of revenue. If you think of it as a pie, we were going to get that share of the pie, that piece of the pie, through the corporate petroleum tax. Everybody, all the oil companies were going to contribute into that share of the pie. What's happened with Hillcorp is by supplanting a C Corp, which is how the tax was built, because that was the structure corporations at the time, of oil companies on the slope at the time that it was built. By supplanting a C corp with an S corp, a piece of that pie has suddenly disappeared. A piece of the revenue of the total revenue picture that the state's designed to get from petroleum has disappeared. It's the same thing as if, in terms of revenue impact, as if Hillcorp was somehow exempt from paying production taxes or somehow exempt from paying royalty. There's a piece of the pie that is missing, a piece of the revenue pie that's missing, because Hillcorp isn't contributing to it in the way that the pie was constructed. So it's, I think, to me, the much better way to look at it is here's the tax, the petroleum tax, or here's the tax on petroleum companies that we intended in this state. Part of it was to come from the corporate tax. Hillcorp is, through a loophole, through its structure, is not contributing its share of the corporate tax, and the state's losing money as a result of that.
I mean, this is on the state because, as if I was looking at the other day, I was trying to figure out if how I wanted to form a certain company or whatever, and I was looking at all these different corporations and everything. I mean, if somebody was going to tax me and I had the opportunity to create an S corp versus a C corp because they weren't taxed, that's still within the law because there's no. So I guess what I'm saying is the term loophole, I think, can be loaded in some ways, but this is on the state. They have to write a statute to include S corps in the thing. This is not, Hillcorp doing anything wrong. They're just utilizing the law as it sees fit, and they're maximizing the returns to their shareholders, which is what they're supposed to do. So this is more on the state to get their act together, in your opinion, other than, it's not Hillcorp just doing anything wrong. They're maximizing their profits. That's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, but they're maximizing, yes, but they're maximizing their profits at a loss to the state. The state should, yes. The state is the one who could fix this by saying, look, we intended the petroleum corporate tax to apply to all corporations, whatever subsection they're formed under. Here's the corporate tax, and Hillcorp, you need to pay it. State should be doing that.
Brad Keithley. Ooh, man, we ran that. I was out of time already. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you, my friend. We appreciate you coming on board. Thank you for being part of it.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Folks, we're out of time for hour one. Hour two is dead ahead. We'll recap some of these things and talk a little bit about the governor's vetoes and the school court case. Back with more of The Michael Duke Show. Yeah, I mean, I just think, the more I looked into this, and I hadn't really considered it before when we've been talking about this, but because I was looking at different corporate structures in something that I'm working on right now, I was like, well, that makes sense because, again, the S Corp has definite advantages for a sole ownership or a partnered ownership situation where it's non-public. The C Corps obviously are built to go public or to have public investment, that kind of thing. So that made sense. And this is really on the state. I can't blame Hillcorp for maximizing their profits or having their structure the way it was because of the way the company is. But this really is a failure of the state to go, well, wait a second, we missed something because this was not really a thing back in the day. So we should get on this. And I mean, that's, again, I think the loophole phrase is a little loaded sometimes, like people are getting away with something, but it was within the law. That's the thing, right?
Well, but here's the deal, Michael. Here's the deal. When we just had an example of it this last legislature, when the state did try to close it. You remember Wilikowski put in an amendment to one of the Cook Inlet bills. The state did try to close it, and Hillcorp all of a sudden, puts in a full court press to kill that amendment and to keep their preferential situation. So yes, it's on the state to fix it, but Hillcorp's certainly trying to preserve it. Now, if you want to say they're revenue maximizing, okay, that's what they do. But Hillcorp certainly tried to spend a lot of effort trying to kill that amendment when the state tried to fix the situation. Sort of regardless of who's responsible, we've got a hole in the petroleum corporate tax, and there's two consequences of that. We're getting less revenue than we would if we plugged the hole, And as a result of less revenue, we're taking more out of the PFD in order to plug the hole that's being created, as opposed to plugging the hole directly and having Hillcorp not pay more, but pay the same as every other oil company in the state. And now we find out with any that fungus is going to grow, is capable of growing, and we're fueling the fungus growing by continuing to give them this benefit, this loophole that enables them to have a hyper competitive advantage when they're trying to acquire other properties. So they have a competitive advantage. They acquire another property, and all of a sudden the state loses the corporate income tax from that as well. I mean, you could paint a picture. I do charts. I could go out a long time and say, well, Hillcorp has this competitive advantage. They could then acquire Exxon's piece. They could acquire ConocoPhillips's piece, and all of a sudden we have a zero corporate tax income coming from the slope. That's not what the petroleum corporate tax was intended to do. Petroleum corporate tax was intended to be a fifth piece, a third largest piece of the overall tax, to grab a share or to take a share of the income earned by the oil companies in the state, and that's what it's designed to do.
I'm in 100% agreement with you, Brad, of all the effects of this. I'm in 100% agreement, but at the same time, this is a failure in my mind. This is a failure of the state. If they want to capture that, then the state needs to do something. And of course, Hillcorp. I mean, if I was an S Corp and they all of a sudden, let's just say they were going to tax I am an S Corp for this business for every. So if all of a sudden they said, we're going to tax all the S Corps, I would fight back against that in the legislature because it would affect me directly. Of course, I'm going to fight back. So I can't necessarily, I see what you're saying. I agree with all the effects, but I think Hillcorp is doing what Hillcorp was supposed to do, which is look out for the interests of their shareholders. And this is on the state to get on the ball and do this if this is what they want to do.
Right. And the state's not doing what it's supposed to do. The state is supposed to be maintaining this five-pronged tax approach with respect to petroleum companies in the state. I mean, the corporate income tax allows the state to have a lower production tax. The corporate income tax allows the state to have a lower oil property tax because a portion of the revenue is going to be raised through corporate revenues. And everything has been designed around everything else working the way it's supposed to work. What's happened is through this, however you want to call it, I keep calling it a loophole because that's what it is. But it's not. It's a loophole in the law. Whatever you want to call it, because of that, not all of the pieces of the petroleum tax code are working. And when you don't have all of those pieces working, you've got a hole that's got to be, since we continue spending, you got a hole that's got to be filled by something else, and it's coming from permanent fund dividends. And we've created a situation in which that can now, Eni is demonstrating that it can continue to grow. Right.
And again, this is a failure of the state. If we extrapolate it out to your scenario where they basically consume Exxon and Conoco and all that other kind of stuff, man, the legislature, you could hear the puckering up from here because all of a sudden they realize how much they're actually losing. They would have to do something at that point, or cut the budget. I mean, either way, maybe that's the perfect way. Maybe that's the starve the beast thing. I don't know. It's either that or I guess they hit us with the income tax, one or the other.
They'll just keep cutting the PFD, Michael. I mean, that's the really tragic thing here. We got oil companies skipping out on tax bills through the state's failure to close the loophole, if we want to put it that way. We got oil companies skipping out on tax bills, and we're shifting the burden to the PFD through additional PFD cuts. We're shifting the burden to middle and lower income Alaska families. We're not even shifting it to non-residents aren't picking up a share of this. Non-residents that are working on the slope aren't picking up a share of this. It's all being shifted to middle and lower income Alaska families. And it's just the tax code has a hole in it that needs to be closed.
Yeah. Well, and that's on the state. Now you got to find 21 and 11 people who agree with us that's what should happen there. So, all right, Brad. Well, thank you so much for coming on board. Enjoy the music, my friend. Enjoy your time off in your sacred place. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on board.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we're out of time. We got more coming up. Hour 2 is dead ahead. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Welcome to the program, Hour 2 of the big radio show for today. We're going to be continuing on. Chris Story will be joining us at the end of this hour for our weekly uplift and life coaching lesson. Can't wait for that. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So come on out and join us here in the final segment of the show today. We just finished up with Brad Keithley from the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3, what we're lovingly calling Truth Tuesday now, to talk about this. It was interesting because we started talking about this Hillcorps loophole here at the end of the program, what Brad calls the Hillcorps loophole. And it's amazing what happens when you get a little more education on a certain subject. And I happen to be looking at corporate structures and I was making some business changes and looking at how I do things. And so I was doing a lot of research, and the corporate tax structure thing came up in this, how it affects us in the state of Alaska, business owners and everything else. And I kept realizing, I came to the realization rather, that in the discussion of this issue with Hillcorps, is that because they have organized as an S Corp instead of a C Corp, Brad continues to say that they're not paying, essentially, it's their fair share. That it is, but using the word loophole, I think, is a little bit, it's a loaded term. And I think it implies that somebody, anytime you hear something, about loophole, you feel like somebody's getting away with something. Brian in the chat room said something about, comparing it to, the whole phraseology of the gun show loophole, right? Like somebody's getting away with something because they're following the law and doing something that's legal and lawful, but somebody doesn't like it. And so they call it a loophole because part of the law doesn't exist. And I understand that. I completely agree with what Brad is saying in terms of the effect of what this is doing. There's a loss of revenue. There's it gives them a competitive advantage when they're buying things and things like that, because they don't have to factor in, paying corporate taxes down the road. So therefore they may be able to offer a higher purchase price than another company that's a C Corp that would have to pay those corporate taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, I was thinking about it and I realized that, this is a company doing what companies are supposed to do. Companies are supposed to, provide a good in service, but ultimately they are responsible to the owners of that company, whether they're private owners, sole ownership, or shareholders. They are responsible to maximize the profits for those people so that they can then in turn take that money down the road and use it to invest in other things. And so while the term loophole probably is still a valid, it is such a loaded term, that it came to me that this really is not a problem with Hillcorps per se, but this is a problem with the state. It's not that they're avoiding or breaking the law. There is no law. There is no statute that says a petroleum S Corp has to pay a tax. The statute is clear that it's a petroleum C Corp that has to. And I know we're getting down into the weeds here, but sometimes these things matter. And it really made me think about it. Now, again, the difference between an S Corp and a C Corp is that an S Corp cannot go public. You cannot have an IPO and sell shares and go out on the open market with an S Corp. Only with a C Corp. That's why companies like BP and Conoco and the big ones, that's why they have that, because the idea is they were either already publicly traded companies, or the idea was to go public sometime in the future. Sole proprietorship corporations or small partnership corporations where it's just private individuals is what the S Corp structure was built for. And so while it's not necessarily a loophole, it's a vacancy. There's a hole in the law. I guess you could say it's a loophole. There's a hole in the law where these corporations are just not being taxed. And it's a loss of revenue. But again, the problem is we have to live within our means. And if we starve the beast a little bit, does that help? Or does it just flush more of the permanent fund down the tubes faster and cause the drain of the permanent fund to increase? I mean, either way, the state's appetite for spend is voracious and unending, right? Yes, Donna's right. There's also a difference in that owners of an S Corp pay a higher federal income tax because they have to, as they take profits from the corporation, they have to pay it as an individual versus as a C Corp. So there's differences. But I mean, the main thing is that I don't want to punish somebody because they decided to structure their company in a certain way under the law. And just because the legislature failed to anticipate the fact that an S Corp might be an oil company, that we're going to, I guess, penalize them or intimate that they are doing something necessarily wrong. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. If you're going into a new business opportunity, and Hillcorp is already set up, but let's just say you were going to start a new business in Alaska and you knew that they were going to tax a C Corp, they were going to tax at one level, they were going to tax an S Corp at one level, and that a sole proprietorship might be able to avoid that. So would you set it up as a sole proprietorship? Because in the long run, you would make more money. I mean, each of the ones are taxed at a different level, but would you do that? Or, would you do an S Corp or would you do a C Corp if that was more tax advantageous to you? That's the whole point of corporations. They're to make it tax advantageous, to separate you from business risk and to also create different structures of taxation. So, I mean, I can't fault Hillcorp for doing what they're doing. They are working within the letter of the law to maximize their profit. So if it's anything, it's a failure of the state to either one, have foresight to realize that there could be S Corp. It should have just been any corporation instead of, breaking it out specifically to a C, or they should create a new law. And maybe they don't have the political will to create a new law for S Corps in the petroleum industry. But again, taxation is theft, right? I mean, I'm so frustrated with every time we turn around, one more thing is being taxed, and not just taxed at a single level, but taxed at multiple levels. There was something that I read years ago that just kind of blew my mind. And it was like the number of taxes, not just the amount, but the number of different taxes on a single loaf of bread, right? And it broke it down. And there was something like 15 separate taxes from, the harvesting of the wheat, and the taxes paid on the processing, and then the taxes paid on the shipping of it, and then the taxes, and then the tax and the tax and the tax, all the way down to the sales tax that you had to pay when you bought the loaf of bread or whatever. And it was just, this is just an example of how we're so inured to it at this point. It's just an expectation. Whereas the founders of this country threw a revolution over a 3% tax on mail, right? That's what it was about. I mean, that was the Stamp Act and everything else. That was the thing that lit the fuse on many Americans. And, the whole taxation without representation, we've become so numb to it that it's weird if there's not a tax. And some people just can't even fathom the fact that maybe, when you say, well, maybe we shouldn't have taxes. We shouldn't have a corporate tax. We shouldn't have an income tax. I mean, the income tax has only been around for 100 years, right? 100 years of 245. They did just fine up until 1914. And, all of a sudden now everybody's got to pay into the kitty. And to most people, it would be weird if we didn't. And so when you say things like, taxation is theft or they shouldn't, then they just look at you like, well, then how would we live? How would we do anything? It's a problem. So anyway, that's why I was asking Brad those questions, because, heretofore I've been kind of like, yeah, it sounds right. Sounds like what you're doing. But as I dug into it and I thought about it more and more, I realized this is not a Hillcorps problem. This is not a Hillcorps problem. And yes, there are serious knock-on effects to what's going on with that. I 100% agree with Brad. Because of what's going on with Hillcorps, people are losing more of their dividends. Totally agree with that. They have a competitive advantage. Totally agree with that. They're not paying what other people are paying. I totally agree with that. But this is not a Hillcorps problem. This is a state problem. The state did not have the forethought or the long-term vision or planning to say it should be all corporations, not just C corporations. And the legislature hasn't had the political will to say, oh, we need to even the playing field here so that everybody pays the same, which I hate even saying that. But this is a problem that the state hasn't corrected. I can't blame Hillcorps. I can't blame them at all. They're doing exactly what if I was in a business and those were my options, they're doing exactly what I would do. Choose the path that nets me the most return and still protects me in the same way. I mean, that makes it simple. It is. Yeah, no, this is Tyler says, I agree that there's a hole in the tax code and Hillcorp is exploiting. But are they exploiting it? See, I wouldn't even agree with the word exploiting. Hillcorp is taking advantage of it. I mean, it's a hole in the law where it's just not there, and so they are following the law. He says, and Hillcorp is exploiting it, but who wouldn't? Don't drag them through the mud because we failed to write the law properly. That's exactly it. It is what it is. Kyle says loopholes are mistakes or omissions in legislation. The S Corp tax is a separate, clear policy that's been rejected by the legislature, not a loophole. Yeah, again, I think the word loophole is a loaded phrase. If the legislature has the political will to change it, then Hillcorp will comply, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure. But in the meanwhile, the law of the land is they don't have to pay. They don't have to pay. So it's interesting. It's definitely interesting to see, all that stuff come out. But the more the more information you get, the more you can kind of suss some of these things out. And so, yeah, when you look at the differences between the C Corp and the S Corp, for the most part, it's a difference on how you are taxed as an individual. It's also the difference on whether a company can go public or is more privately held. And I understand, why a company like Conoco or BP would be a C Corp because it's already a publicly traded company versus someplace like Hillcorp, which is founded by a single individual and has some private shareholders, but is not a publicly traded company. Those are the major differences. And then, of course, the way that you're taxed as an individual in an S Corp versus a C Corp. But again, don't blame them. Don't blame them for playing the game and doing well, I guess is what I'm saying, right? They read the rules. They played the game well according to the rules, and don't be unhappy when they're winning because they're playing the game by your rules. There you go. That's what it's all about. Wow. I didn't expect to go off on that tangent this morning, but here we are. All right, we're going to continue. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We will continue with more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after these messages.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
And Donna makes an interesting point as well here. She says Hillcorp is also bidding on leases no other company has. Taxes have negative consequences. I mean, that competitive advantage that Brad was talking about, it's not just a competitive advantage, it's also an encouragement. If they know they can bid on something that they won't have to pay taxes on versus a company that would have to pay taxes on if they make a discovery, then of course they can go out and do more things. It's a brilliant thing. Harold, how does it feel to be wrong so much of the time? He says, I bet Michael is an LLC. S Corp. So there you go. There you go. It's hard when, God love him, but it's just, you got to be used to it by now, though, I imagine. All right. Let me go back up here, see what else you guys were saying that I missed. Brad routinely dies on his vernacular sword. Continued use of loophole confuses the conversation. I think it's a loaded phrase because it implies the term loophole implies minor wrongdoing. What does Webster say when we say loophole? Let me just ask the internet here. Okay, it's an ambiguity or an inadequacy in the law or a set of rules. So technically he's right because it is an inadequacy in the law, right? It's an inadequacy in the law in that they didn't include S Corps in the thing. But I think it also, I think it has a negative connotation in my mind anyway, because anytime I heard the term loophole, and sometimes it's tax loophole, sometimes it's the gun show loophole, it has that kind of like you're getting away with something, right? So, Tyler says exactly. They're working within the letter of the law. They're not doing anything wrong. Change the law. Don't blame a company because they have good lawyers. Brian says loophole. You keep using that word. It might be convenient shorthand, but it's not entirely accurate. Like the gun show loophole. It is in the way the law was designed. Donna's idea: eliminate corporate income taxes for everyone. Hoorah! 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 Taxation is theft, right? I mean, yeah, I'm with you. I am 100% with you on that. Kathleen says, do you know the difference between a C Corp and an S Corp? I do. I tried to articulate it as best I can. As I said, I've been doing some reading recently and doing some comparatives with different company structures, and that's what led me to this epiphany of, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Well, it just like that. When Brad was talking about Hillcorp fighting back against the legislature trying to enact an S Corp tax, and Frank said, I would too if I was Hillcorp. Yes, exactly. I mean, exactly. I would not blame them. If it was me, I would be fighting tooth and nail to do all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, he's right. The problem lays not with Hillcorp, but it lays with the state for not having, if from that argument perspective, it lays with the state for not having a law already in place or not having passed a law since then. So there you go. Donna wins. Donna wins the internet best answer of the day, which is just eliminate all corporate taxes. I am definitely cannot disagree with that. Cannot disagree with that. All right. So, Kathleen was asking Harold. I'm sorry, I can't see the nested structure when you reply to somebody. All I see is the raw comments coming in. I can't see when you're replying to somebody else. So sometimes I think you're asking me something when you're asking somebody else something. That's what it is. So there you go. And yeah, I mean, LLCs are another thing. I mean, limited liability companies, again, a different structure altogether. They all have their pluses and minuses, but yeah, can't blame somebody if they set their corporate structure up a certain way and the law doesn't affect them. Not my, not surprising.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke show.
Yeah. Welcome back. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Y'all ready? Y'all ready for this? We got more coming up. We're going to talk a little bit here about the Supreme Court ruling that came out last Friday. Always some of the best stuff comes out on Friday after we get off the air. It's kind of frustrating sometimes, but on Friday, the Alaska Supreme Court unanimously reversed Judge Adolph Zeman's Superior Court ruling that had struck down correspondence schools as unconstitutional, and they restored the program that's existed for the last 10 years. And Governor Dunleavy did a little bit of a victory lap on that, saying it was a massive win for public ed. He said in his statement, the court got it right on this one. We are confident that the statutes were always constitutional. We thank the Supreme Court for its prompt decision in favor of the state. Correspondence programs and whole school programs can continue in their entirety. The Superior Court had entered that final judgment that said that statutes allowing correspondence parents to be reimbursed for educational expenses at public, private, and religious organizations are facially unconstitutional. But of course, the state argued that private organizations in the statutes refer to retailers or vendors, not private institutions, which is what the state constitution refers to. The state, through the Department of Ed and Early Development, appealed the ruling and was joined by interventors, parents who used allotments to pay for their children's tuition at private school. In their ruling, the justices said the statutes could not be deemed unconstitutional because there are many, quote, constitutionally permissible use of allotment funds, unquote. So this is going to be the sticking point. I can tell you right now, the sticking point on this whole argument, because they've remanded it back to the Superior Court. The sticking point on this whole argument is going to be that reimbursement for private tuition. That's going to be the sticking point that they're going to have the hardest time on, I think. The parties appeared before the justices Thursday, agreed that school districts can approve the use of allotment funds by students enrolled in correspondence study to purchase books, computers, and art supplies from private businesses. The parties agreed that allotment funds could be spent on martial arts classes at a private gym, pottery lessons at an artist studio. These providers are all private organizations, which is one of the biggest arguments that, I think had a lot of people in panic, because the straight reading of it, the way Zeman read it, was that you would have to basically, the state couldn't spend any money with a private company. Now, maybe that was taking it to the extreme, but that was kind of the reading that Zeman had come out with. The justices went on to say allotment funds can also be spent to enroll in classes at public institutions such as the University of Alaska, and none of these uses of allotments entails a direct benefit to a religious or other private education institution. Now, they did not rule on whether the public reimbursements could be used to pay expenses at private schools, such as tuition, saying that argument remains part of the litigation on remand. It's going back to the Superior Court, and that the Superior Court must address that segment. So again, everything else is kind of free and clear, but the one sticking point is, the thing that folks like Jody Taylor and others have been crowing about here for the last 2 years, which is enroll your kid in this correspondence school, and then take the money that they give you and go over to this private school over here and use it to offset your tuition or pay your whole tuition. I don't know how much it is, but it's a big chunk of it. right? Just go over here and do it. And we had Jody Taylor on the program here to talk about that here maybe a year ago. And as I interviewed her, I kept thinking, somebody's going to get bent out of shape about this, and this is going to go to court. And more than likely, this will be reversed, that they won't be able to do that anymore. It's going to cause a problem. I had no idea that Zeman would throw out the entire baby with the bathwater of all correspondence and homeschooling. But the Supreme Court has, I think, done a solid here. Scott Kendall, hello, Scooter. Scott Kendall quote was at the end of the KTUU article, and I've highlighted it just because you have to understand the background of Scott Kendall and all the things that he's got his fingers in right now. Let me read you the quote. Although we're disappointed in this outcome, we understand the court's reasoning. They are unwilling to rule on the constitutionality of using public funds to pay private school tuition without having one of the school districts who engaged in the practice joined as a party, because there were no school districts attached to this. It was just private. It was teachers. It was anyway. Therefore, they have remanded the case back to the Superior Court to allow that to happen. What is important to remember is that the court did not reverse on substantive grounds. They did not approve of this shadow voucher program. And so we and the plaintiffs will discuss our options, but we will likely join one or more school districts before the Superior Court following remand. I love his term. I love his use of the phrase shadow voucher program. Now, to put that in context, you got to remember that this is Scott Kendall, who is the architect of ballot measure number 2, the ranked choice voting scenario, where all they talked about was dark money, right? I mean, that was the thing. Dark. You don't want dark money. You don't want a shadow voucher program. Would you put your kids in a shadow voucher program? I mean, it's just the same kind of language. I just had to laugh because it's the same kind of language, and it's the same kind of thing that we saw in the ballot measure number 2. Now, I'm pretty sure that probably the paying for private institutions with allotment funds will probably go down, because there's not a framework of state statute to make it work. There needs to be a state statute. There needs to be a framework of statute to basically allow for backpack funding. It needs to happen. It's happening right now. Since COVID, we've had 12 or 13 states that have come forward and created some form of backpack funding or school choice programs. And I think that number is just going to increase. But we need to have the political will in the legislature to make it happen. We do have, per capita, the largest homeschooling body of students in the country on a per capita basis. We're huge. I mean, we got 20% of our kids basically, 17%. It's a huge number. 25,000 kids out of 135,000 who are homeschooled. It's a big number. So I think eventually we're going to have to create some kind of framework. And I think people want that. People, when you offer them more choice versus less choice, normally human nature is that they want the more choice. And contrary to popular belief, it's a benefit to all when that kind of choice comes in there, because it gives them the competitive spirit. You've got to, kind of do a better job to attract more people to the way you're doing things. If you're not doing things in the proper way, if you're not producing a good product, and in this case, the product of the education system is a bright and fulfilled student who can, go out in life and do it. It forces you to reevaluate what you're doing and figure out how to make it better. Right? That's what it is. That's what it'll make it. We need to be looking at this. We need to look at the schools and look at are they top heavy? Are they, I think the answer to that if you follow my beliefs, is that I believe that the administrative burden is what we're looking at in many of these schools. I mean, we got 50 plus school districts for the same number. I mean, I think Hawaii has one school district for all the entire state. We've got 53, each one duplicating efforts, some with as few as 100 students. or less. And, why aren't we talking about consolidating school districts? Why aren't we talking about this duplication of effort? Because every time that happens, we just burn another dollar. Why aren't we talking about making things more efficient? Why aren't we talking about how do we bring up the scholastic achievement from the 48th and I'm sorry. That's right. Bob Griffin told us we made it all the way up to 46 on reading. I think it was math or reading, one of the two. We made it all the way up to 46th from 48th and 49th. So we're increased in one grade level. So, but again, we're spending some of the biggest money in the country. Not the biggest. The biggest is Jersey or Delaware? They're spending like $28,000 a kid. So, but we're up there in the top, and yet we're in the bottom on the scholastic achievement scores. So, but this is going to be interesting. The Supreme Court came back. I'm pleasantly surprised. I think they're going to have a hard time on the remand. I think the anybody that gets involved in that, I think they're going to have a hard time convincing the judge that using allotment money for private tuition is going to fly because, again, there's no structure behind it. There's no statutory structure to justify that. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens with that. But I'm hoping, according to the NEA National, Alaska is 6th in the nation for student spending. Okay. I knew we were up there in the top 5 to 10 somewhere. But it's a lot, and yet we're in the lowest percentile for achievement. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. You can't just keep saying, well, we need more. We need more money, and we'll do better this time. No, you've got to fundamentally change the way you're doing something. It's just how it is. So anyway, it's going back on remand, and we'll see where that comes about. But I imagine this is going to stretch into next year, but at least the pressure is off for all of the homeschoolers and the allotment correspondence schools and the homeschool programs and any allotment program out there. The pressure's off. The Supreme Court says that part is constitutional. Proceed ahead. So is it too little too late? Have they activated a bunch of homeschooling parents who weren't maybe politically motivated and are now like, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore? We'll have to see. We'll have to see if because this court ruling came out very quickly. And I think part of it was because you could see the panic on people like Loki Tobin's face when this thing came out, and they were like, well, what do we do? I think they understood that they may have poked the bear on that one. But we'll see if there's a reaction come election season from this on the electorate side. Okay, we got to go. Chris Story is going to be joining us in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Let me see what you guys have been saying here. Excuse me. Yeah, how does it feel to be wrong? Sorry, I'm just over here doing my thing. Let's see. Longevity bonus beats gravity funded forever. What? Okay. Finally, the Alaska Supreme Court did the right thing, said Terry. Yeah. No, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised. Fat Ray says he was also. The amount of surprise here is enormous. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised that they found that, that they found in favor of all those things, for sure. We need Kendall music. We need, anytime we talk about Scott Kendall, we need like Darth Vader or a clown whistle or something. Maybe we need like an Imperial March for Scott Dark Money. Shadow voucher program. We'll find something. Yeah, we'll find it. Let's see. Backpack funding. Sourdough Steel over on Twitch says backpack funding will lead to following curriculum. I think anyway. So no thanks. I'll handle it myself, but I'm fortunate to do so. You're saying that if they take the backpack funding, they will be forced into a specific curriculum? That's not how backpack funding works. Funding follows you to do the thing of your choice. That's the whole point of it. I have not seen one yet that has a curriculum, guarantee or anything in it. That's not what I've seen. Before I get too far along in this whole thing, let me get Chris Story on the phone, because otherwise it'll be in trouble. We'll be in trouble. All right. Does it ring? Dang it, Bobby. Dang it. All right. Hold the line. I got to call you back. This dang thing isn't working. Hold on. I'm going to call Chris right back here, but there we go. Let's do that and see if we can get it back one more time. There we go.
How about now?
I don't know why it does that. I just don't know why. You think with all this technology, you just would think, but
that's interesting that you blame the tool, not the craftsman.
It's true. It is true. I mean, I did just push the same button twice, but it could be me. I could not have pushed it. I could not have been holding my mouth the right way. So,
Mm-hmm.
All right, my friend, are you ready for today? What are we talking about? What is the discussion for today? This really sounds like a bad joke. Okay, 2 boys in a pyramid. All right.
No, and a pyramid.
Oh, and I was saying
important.
In a pyramid. I was like, two boys walk into a pyramid and they're looking for their mummy. That was the punchline. Is the 2 boys walking?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Did you just come up with that, or is that an age old?
No, I just came up with that. I mean, I talk for a living. Yeah. Occasionally, stuff like that comes out well.
Wow.
It's just, I know.
Yeah, I guess you know what? Every now and then you're going to find a piece of corn, even in verbal diarrhea.
That's right. Exactly. Every now and then, even a blind pig will find a truffle. All right. So 2 boys and a pyramid. Again, which sounds like bad. How you doing, my friend? How's things going?
Very well. Yeah, no complaints at all. How about you?
It's been, I will say this has probably been the busiest 5 weeks of my life right now. It's been a lot. I've probably traveled 3,000 miles in a car in the last 4 weeks, and I'm just I'm go. I'm happy.
That's exciting. That's the land of the midnight sun.
Yeah, glad to be alive, but woof, man. It's been crazy for sure. But I'm ready to hear what you have to say. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Chris. Harold just said he looks like the Alaska Kevin Spacey. And now I can.
About 4 years ago, that would have just been insulting on one level.
Yeah, I know. Now it's insulting on so many levels. I mean, I could fix that. No, there we go. I'll fix it.
I actually see myself as or the Alec Baldwin character from Glengarry Glen Ross.
There you
go. Spacey character.
There you go.
But to each their own.
I'm sorry. That was. Oh, all right. Even a blind pig can find a truffle now and then. All right, let's continue on. Chris Story is our guest. Now that we're done insulting each other, which is our ritual, by the way, folks. We meet each other and we immediately insult each other because it's just it's a Christian loving relationship. We're going to continue here. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's do it. Okay. All right. It's the final segment of the Tuesday show, which means we bring on our guru of positivity, the Renaissance man. I mean, he is a speaker, positivity guru. He's a realtor. He's a radio show host. He's a potter. He's a lover. He's a fighter. It's Mr. Chris Story. Hello, my friend.
And an author with a new book out called The Millionaire Maker. But
yes.
We can talk about that another time.
Yeah, exactly. An author. I forgot.
I mean, if you're gonna read what I wrote, read it all.
I'm sorry.
Read the whole
I couldn't read your handwriting down at the bottom. That was the problem. Million, where some, it was a million what? What's it? I don't even understand what that means. Chris Story comes on every week to give us a little bit of a positivity boost, a little life coaching, to share with us some stories and just kind of bring the show back on track, because usually we're so pissed off from talking to Brad about all the hot stuff of the day that we needed a little soothing to, it's a little salve to soothe the savage beast. So Chris, today you want to talk about two boys and a pyramid, which I thought was a joke at the beginning. I thought he said two boys in a pyramid, and I thought, were they looking for their mummy? And but anyway, two boys and a pyramid. Chris, give me what's the story here?
It's a tale old as time, Michael Dukes. It's about a pharaoh who asked his two nephews, tasked them actually, to build a pyramid. Each of them had to build a pyramid on their own with no outside help. He said, whomever finishes the pyramid first, whichever of you finishes this task first, will inherit my entire kingdom and all of my wealth and my title, and you shall become the pharaoh of this land. And so the one nephew immediately got to work. I mean, he wasted no time, Michael. He marked out the foundation. He had it flagged. He had it ready to go. He'd done all his utility locates. He was ready to go day one. He was ready. And he placed, in fact, on the first day, he placed the cornerstone of the foundation for his pyramid. Now, within a year, he had worked and laid up a good bit of that first layer, but he realized something. He wasn't strong enough. So he hired a trainer, and he started taking supplements, and he started eating a very clean diet, and he started eating mean and lean and nothing but meat, and he was building his muscles. Meanwhile, the other brother, for that entire first year, never emerged from his barn. He spent the entire year there, locked away, working on something. Nobody knew what, but it wasn't touching his plot of land. The pyramid hadn't even gotten started. So 2 more years passed. The one nephew growing stronger by the day, putting stone up after stone up. He had actually finished the second row of stones of his pyramid within that first 2 years. The other nephew, still MIA, nothing, hadn't emerged not once from that barn. Come the third year, the first nephew, muscle bound, stronger by the day, he had gotten to about 2.5 courses of his multi-layered pyramid. Meanwhile, his brother emerged from the barn with a giant wheeled contraption of some sort. And with just a little bit of leverage and a crank, he was able to move the first stone into place without breaking a sweat. So 3 more years go by. The first muscle-bound brother, stronger day by day, has about 4 courses up, and the other brother finished his pyramid. And he had spent that first number of years building his mind, building a machine to help leverage his way into his uncle's fortune. And the moral of that story is obvious. Everything you've been doing to this point in your life has been building towards your next step. What you're doing today is as a result of what you've learned yesterday, and what you'll do tomorrow is based on the skills, the knowledge, the experience that you've gained up into this point. So everything you do is building towards something next, whatever that next is. And for everybody, it's different. I went from pottery making into real estate sales 22 years ago. And it didn't dawn on me until after I'd been in real estate for a couple of minutes that I realized, wait a minute, everything I'd gone through my entire life to that moment in time, working in a hardware store, then starting a pottery company, dealing with customers, traveling all over the state in the Northwest, selling our pots, going from fair to fair, door to door, conquering business after business with our sales skills, led to our success in real estate. And it made the transformation professionally look easy, but it hadn't been. But it was all the time spent in the barn, building and gaining the skills of the machine, the contraption to leverage into that next thing. So whatever it is you're looking to do next, I promise you, you've got the skills to at least get started and make that first move towards it, because you've been in the barn of life building whatever it is you need for tomorrow.
Yeah, and working, I mean, this is also kind of an analogy for working smarter instead of harder. I mean, in the same way, right? I mean, to leverage what you have. In my mind, anyway, that's my takeaway from this story. Because
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the first brother was a go-getter, right? I mean, he's like, I'm going to go do it. And he goes out and just starts slapping stuff together. But, the other guy is thinking about it and considering it and saying, what's it, they're both great workers, but one of them just had a little bit of a different, made a better mousetrap, so to speak, and got it done. And so there are ways to improve what you're doing, even when it looks like you're doing nothing.
Yeah, Abe Lincoln said that if he was given 6 hours to chop down a tree, he'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening his axe. And I think that's just whatever point of life you're at. And some people are listening to this in their early 20s. Some are considerably older, midlife to older. And I'm saying to you that there's maybe something that you want to do. You've been thinking about it, talked about it, you've dreamt about it, but maybe for whatever reason you've stayed in the barn a little too long, or you don't realize that in that barn of your own life, you've actually been building an incredible machine to help you do what it is you want to do next. A lot of us get, that you could think of all the old adages and saws about getting stuck in a rut, whatever it is, or this sort of law of entropy, that your life is just going to diminish as you get older. It doesn't have to. You can be expansive. You can expand on and stand on what you've done and built and have a larger life even as you get older, depending upon what it is you wish and want for. I think a lot of us feel like, we're stuck in the slow lane. You can jump over to the fast lane quickly just by recognizing all the skills you've already built to this point in time.
Right. I mean, you talk about that in The Backyard Millionaire, right? I mean, Oscar, the man that the character is built on, was a true life person, and he didn't start his conglomerate of building and properties and everything else until he was in his mid to late 50s, wasn't he?
Yeah, 55. Yep, 55. And the quote to me at 85 was, I just don't want to die because I've got too much left to do. I've got too much left to accomplish. He told Tiffany and I that he got started at 55, built his first home for somebody else, and he said, they haven't caught me since.
Yeah. And that's what I think. I think I was having a conversation with my son yesterday or Saturday or Sunday. And he was talking about, life goals and where he wants to go and what he wants to do. And he's like, I don't know if I want to do this because I don't want to get stuck in something. And I said, well, you're thinking about it wrong. You can change at any time. I mean, that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like society has told us that we're going to fit into our little groove and our mold, and we're going to stay there till we die, right? Or till we retire or whatever it is. If you choose this, it's the only choice you can make. But the thing is, that's not how it works. I don't care what society says. You can make, if you're going to be, if you want to start off as a firefighter and then decide 5 years down the road that you want to change to become a potter, or whatever it is, you can do that. It may fly against society's norms. It may not be what everybody else is doing, but the only thing stopping you from making a change like that is you.
17 years ago, I started my radio show, and it was a passion project, and I felt really blessed and fortunate that the Beckers said, "Yeah, you can do a show on our airways." And one of the greatest compliments I would ever get would be in that first 6 months to a year of doing it, people say, "Oh, you missed your calling." Like, no, I found it. I found something that I love to do. So I'm doing it. What do you mean I missed it? I didn't miss anything just because I was, 30. I can't do the math, but I was 30 something when I started. And it's like, no, I hadn't missed anything. I had been preparing my entire life for that moment in time to begin to transform, to launch something new. Tiffany and I are getting ready to launch a new business, and we couldn't be more excited. Our hair's on fire as we think about it. No, literally, we got too close to a birthday candle yesterday. But anyway, but we're loving it. At this age, and we're in our early 50s, and we're starting this new endeavor with all the energy of a 19-year-old.
Well, people say, oh, you missed your calling. And that'd be like saying, well, what if I had tried to do this 15 years before I may have been horrible because I didn't have all these experiences and this knowledge and the sales and the public speaking and all these other things. You know, I go back and I actually still have recordings of some of the first commercials that I ever produced. And I go back and I go, oof, man, those were so bad. And if you tried to say
they were awful,
they were awful. I mean, they were just like the standard, me reading robotically they were horrible. But, from there to here, sure, if anybody just jumps in and you start doing something here and it sounds great, oh, you should have done this years ago. No, I shouldn't have, because if I had, it would have been horrible. You're always building up to what the next thing, to what the next great thing is. And don't be afraid of change. That's the thing. Don't be afraid that if you decided that you're on the wrong pony, you can get off, then get on another one in the race. It's not, you got to stick with this one the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. That idea of transitioning into another phase of life, but you're still bringing the bag of tools with you. Like I said, I was driving home one day from a show, doing a pottery show up the road somewhere, and I remember driving along the tourniquet arm, and I just remember thinking to myself was starting to study for my real estate test and taking the course, and I just started thinking, what if this doesn't work? And then I suddenly just started putting into place in my mind sort of an inventory of everything that I had done to that point, growing up on my grandfather's real estate development, essentially in the shadow of my dad building homes and his construction company and everything. And I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I've been preparing for a long time and helping people solve problems. And all of it everything I'd been doing was preparatory for the new career. And that was 22 years ago. And since then, we've started and launched several other businesses. And so never plan to stop.
Never plans to stop. Never be afraid to change course or to branch out. I was surprised to hear that from my son, but we straighten him out. It's the same kind of thing. Don't get caught up in that idea that you can't change. All right, Chris Story, thank you, my friend. As always, it's great to speak with you. Thanks for coming on board today.
Thank you, Michael. Have a nice day.
You bet. Folks, we're out of time for today. Tomorrow is, we'll do a little bit of firearms stuff because there's no Firearms Friday. And we'll do Mike Shower, and we'll just we'll futz around with it. How about that? Don't forget, I'm off Thursday, Friday. We'll see you. All right, folks, thanks for coming on board and joining us. We appreciate you being part of it. As I said earlier, we're off on Thursday and Friday, so don't get it twisted if you turn on and I'm not there. We will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Dukes Show.